Welcome to the Mental Health Conference. It's good to Zoom with you. How we wish we could be in person, but this is the next best thing. We're going to sing a song written by Jill Ann Marks after her daughter Jamie died. We've been singing it at this conference since the conference began, and this is really for all of you, for all of us, to keep opening the doors in this year, opening the Zoom rooms. Livtoach delatot, livtoach machshavot, livtoach levavot, merape nefashot, merape mishpachot, merape kehilot. Opening doors, opening minds, and opening hearts, by gathering to learn and to share. Healing lives, healing families, and communities too, by offering our love and our care. The time for Tikkun Olam is now. It's time to respond to the call. With compassion and acceptance, support and respect, we bring refuah and shalom to us all. We light candles to remember the ones we have lost. We light candles to support those in pain. We light candles of healing for all of us, to bring healing and wholeness once again. Livtoach elatot, livtoach machshavot, livtoach levavot, merape nefashot, merape mishpachot, merape kehilot. Opening doors, opening minds, and opening hearts, by gathering to learn and to share. Healing lives, healing families, and communities too, by offering our love and our care. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, yadada, yadada, la 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 la. Hine ma tov, yadada, yadada, la 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 la. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet
Brachim Habayim, welcome to this virtual mental health conference. I am Rabbi Zimmerman, the Senior Rabbi of Temple Israel, and annually we are so proud of hosting the Mental Health Conference for the Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minnesota. We today are not able to be in our beautiful sanctuary where every year I feel the connection of all of you who attend this conference. It is the way for Temple to open our doors and welcome a wider community. This year, I am welcoming you to this conference from my home to your home. It is an opportunity, a unique one. And you will hear, I'm sure, over this day that this is a year like no other. And that is true. While we physically are distant, we are spiritually connected. And this mental health conference is bigger than any pandemic or any hurdle we might feel. It is a healing journey for our community. This is a beautiful journey. Judaism holds us during this time as well. We are taught in the Talmud that those first set of 10 commandments that Moses went up to Mount Sinai to retrieve, when he came down out of his upset and disorientation, out of his anger and sadness, he broke the sacred tablets of the 10 Commandments. Later, God gives all of us a second chance. And so Moses goes back up to the mountain and he brings back a complete whole set. Our tradition reminds us that both are holy. And in the first ark were held the broken pieces of the first tablet and the second tablet at the same time. To me, it teaches us that in our brokenness, we can come together, and actually, our strength is in our brokenness. This is a reflection of what the Talmud teaches us in a prayer book that we put together, daily services at Temple Israel. And I want to read it directly from our prayer book, from our Siddur. Its words often help me during difficult times. And I offer these words to you and your family and your neighbors. In the Talmud, we are taught that the ark held both the shattered fragments of the first set of tablets and the whole unbroken second set. While we never lose our brokenness, we can become whole again. We can embrace our shattered hearts. We can become more compassionate, caring, and forgiving because we feel our brokenness when we share the pain of others. In our souls, we carry both sets of tablets. This is a year where our broken hearts come together. We will hear reflections and teachings throughout the day. One man's journey of struggle and wrestling will touch our hearts. We as human beings are all broken, but out of that brokenness is our strength when we link our arms together, when we connect in any way possible. It is through our brokenness that we find our strength and together confront the brokenness in our world. I give you this prayer at the start of your journey, and I will see you at the end of the day again. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and may God keep you. Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'yechineka. May God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious unto you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's light be upon you. May God grant you a sense of peace and wholeness through our shattered hearts as we say, Amen. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Judy Helper, Chief Executive Officer at Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis. It's really been a great privilege for me and for my organization to be a part of this wonderful annual conference that has taken place every year for the past 20 years. And each year we come together for a day of learning and supporting, sharing resources and stories. It has done so much for our community, the Jewish and broader community, to elevate our understanding for people that live with mental illness, their caregivers, their family members, and for professionals to learn more about how to help people who come to us for assistance when they are managing the challenges of their illness. It's really been a great opportunity. It has done so much, and I am so grateful to all the leaders and to all of you. And I think it's important to mention that this began 20 years ago with the unfortunate death of Barbara Schneider, a woman in our community who demonstrated in the challenges that she faced and ultimately how she died, that people with mental illness can be quite vulnerable. And when people don't understand what is the reality of people living with mental illness, very unfortunate things can happen, as was the case with Barbara Schneider, who died, unfortunately, at the hands of police officers who were hoping to be helpers. So it is with that tragic beginning that we have grown in our numbers, our interest, and our strength all these years. I know today's conference is going to be a great conference, and I thank you all for your participation. It's my great honor at this point to introduce my colleague, Ruth Olcon, Jewish Family Service of St. Paul, CEO.
Hello, my name is Ruth Hampton Olcon. I'm the CEO of Jewish Family Service St. Paul. Welcome. It's wonderful to be a partner in this conference. This is a great conference for many reasons. One of the important ones is that it's an opportunity for all of us to gather. Recipients of services, our family members, professionals, advocates. There's a place for all of us. And we are so grateful for the countless hours of the planning committee who have made this happen for us. Many members of the planning committee for the conference have been involved since the beginning, and they showed up again for us this year. They showed up to create this meaningful virtual event that continues the tradition of being a gathering place and a support place for all of us. We appreciate them so much. Now I'd like to turn this over to a key member of that team, the conference coordinator, Tabitha.
Thank you to Sheer Harmony, Rabbi Zimmerman, Judy, and Ruth for setting the stage for this year's conference. I'm Tabitha Bensi Durango, the Community Conference Coordinator at Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis. Thank you for being here with us today. We are glad that you're here. As you journey through the day with us, we invite you to take care. We have intentionally created transition breaks in between sessions to give you the opportunity to get up and stretch, perhaps click into mindful meditation with Kathy Flaminio, take time to use the restroom, grab a healthy snack, or maybe a cup of tea. The conference homepage is set up for ease of use. To join a specific session, click the blue highlighted session name at the appropriate time on your schedule, and it will take you right into the Zoom meeting where it is held. You may go back to the conference homepage at any time and explore other options. I especially want to mention the green buttons on the left-hand side of your conference homepage. Jewish Family and Children's Service staff will be available throughout the day for a brief face-to-face conversation regarding resources and support as needed. If you click on the JFCS Info and Referral Live Chat button, it will take you to a waiting room. Our staff will let you in one person at a time for a brief, confidential conversation. They will do their best to try to connect you with the requested resources right then. But you are also able to make a plan to follow up for additional information in the next day or so. Staff from the Hennepin County Library will be available in the live library room. They will help you find books, obtain a library card, and explore other library resources. The session handout button will give you the opportunity to view, save, or print any documents that may correspond with your breakout sessions or provide you with useful information during the conference day. The virtual resource fair offers you the chance to browse and connect with 20 different organizations through their respective websites. Please take the time to notice the community of sponsors and community planners that enable us to host this conference. And please take the time to evaluate the conference, as this is the tool that is used to ensure a relevant, meaningful experience as we plan for future conferences. We want to thank the tech team at Allied Productions today. They are securing all the technology pieces of the conference to keep it running smoothly and safely. If you have any tech questions or issues on Zoom with the conference today, please contact us using the blue tech button with the email address located on the conference homepage, and we will get back to you quickly. Now I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker for today's event, KARE 11 producer and former anchor, Brian Pyatt. He will share his personal mental health journey with his colleague, Jana Shorthall. They will discuss Brian's focus on living with obsessive-compulsive disorder and anxiety and creating a work-life balance. In 2019, Brian began speaking publicly about the experience of having panic attacks on live television and how understanding his struggles with OCD has been a key piece in his healing. By sharing his own story, he hopes to let others know they aren't alone in their struggles. Brian encourages people to invite anxiety, fear, and doubt along for the ride, explore the art of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and show up for their lives. There's a resiliency within all of us that we don't even realize, Brian says. Trust that it's there. In addition to his role at KARE 11, Brian is also co-founder of the Refresh Network, an online platform aimed at bringing conversations around mental health to light and encouraging others to lean into the journey of life. And now I want to thank Brian for being live in the studio with us today for this event. Welcome.
Tabitha, thank you so very much. Such an absolute honor to be here today. I definitely wish we could all be in person, right? But a huge thank you to everybody that's made this happen in this virtual way. And really looking forward to diving into the conversation. I guess it was over a year ago now that I made the decision to really start opening up more about my mental health and really use the opportunity and the platform that my job at KARE 11 has given me within the community to try to reach people, let them know that they're not alone, have conversations like what we're having here today. And the person that was super pivotal in allowing me to do that at KARE 11, the person that I sat down with and did the interview with that turned into a story that we shared on the air at KARE 11 was my coworker, become a dear friend, Jana Shorthall. And so I thought, who better than Jana Shorthall to hang out with us here today to dive into this conversation. And my friend, I'm just so honored that you would take the time to hang out and to chat and to just see where the conversation goes.
It's good to see you.
Yes.
I haven't
seen you forever.
Time in many months. The reality we're all really living in. But I spent some time this morning really reflecting on that original conversation. We won't go too far into that if you haven't seen it. Reflecting on the courage that it took to do it. I I did not know things that Brian was going to share that day, and we're going to share those right now as well.
Yeah.
So why don't we kind of get into it? I can remember being at work, and you had perhaps done this on social media,
Yep.
and there was a real response to trying to really understand Brian's story, and from being on television part of it, within Care 11, a lot of us had questions.
Yeah.
When Brian decided, after coming to the actual apex, like, I'm not going to be on TV anymore, and none of us really knew why. So why don't we start, folks, there? You know,
Sure.
you made a decision to go off the air, but none of us really understood what was happening.
Yeah. I had gotten to a point where we're doing the job of stepping in front of the camera day in and day out and doing the anchor thing got to be really, really tough. I kind of described it as I felt like I was playing a character every day, stepping into a role that I think, number one, was feeling potentially not super authentic to me. Didn't feel exactly like I was talking about the things that I was really meant to be talking about on a daily basis. And then couple that with struggling with some pretty intense panic attacks.
Which were not new to you. Yeah, and let's get to that. You know, people, it's too simple to say Brian was having anxiety and panic attacks
Yep.
on television, which we didn't even know. He was doing it on air in secret almost. Brian was able to hide it.
Yep.
But panic attacks weren't new to you.
No. So I really go back. So struggling with anxiety, I think, is something that as a kid, there were a lot of traces of it, right? Like as a kid, I could see a lot of, I was always really consumed with like, scared I was going to throw up at school, or really scared that I was going to faint at school, or scared of having a stomach ache. Like those things would get really, really intense for me as a kid. But I lived a beautiful childhood, right? Like had a lot of really beautiful experiences. I was very carefree. It was very easygoing. And then our family went through a big move. We moved from Denver, Colorado to Fargo, North Dakota when I was in 6th grade. And I was sitting in the lunchroom in 6th grade at Agassiz Middle School in Fargo, North Dakota. And I had what I now really understand to be a huge panic attack, and had this huge wave wash over me of like feeling not real. It was this huge wave of like feeling very detached from my body, and being very like almost kind of in this like dreamlike state. And I was terrified. You know, here I was a 6th grader and having no idea what I was experiencing in that moment. I've now since, a number of years later, I came across the term depersonalization, which is a very common symptom with anxiety, where your body just kind of like numbs out. And it's kind of in a beautiful way, right? It's like my body trying to protect me from really intense anxiety. But from that point on, my mental health has never been the same. My whole existence, my whole being became about checking to see if I was going to have that feeling every day that I stepped out into the world, and convinced that I had a brain tumor, convinced that I had something terribly wrong with me. We went to doctors. Doctors didn't really know what was going on. And nobody at that time really said to me, Brian, I think you might be struggling with anxiety. Like it just wasn't, it was a different time, I think, as well. This is back in like 1997, where, mental health probably wasn't talked about as much as it is today. But I still, to this day, can feel that depersonalization feeling. I feel it right now. It's become a very consistent piece of my, of what I experience, but my relationship with it has really shifted over the years. So anxiety was something that I struggled with for a really long time, really ramped up when I was in middle school, but I didn't hear the term anxiety or really start to understand that maybe I'm struggling with anxiety probably until I got to like college. That was when I really started to actually like see a therapist and kind of explore ways to maneuver it.
Well, I think a lot of people perhaps watching at home right now might identify with the coping mechanisms, that you talked about, because you had to figure out to move forward where to put that.
Absolutely.
And in to be able to participate in life and work
Absolutely.
and goals, right?
Yep.
But there had to be a point, Brian, that you get to KARE 11, you're on the morning show, you're hosting, you're anchoring, that something must have become unsustainable. You
Yeah.
drew a line.
Yep. I mean, getting the job at KARE 11, I was 26 years old, right? I mean, I had to pinch myself every day that I was walking into that building. I couldn't believe that I had the job. It was literally like, at the time, a dream job. And I really, I rode that wave for a really long time, and it was really exciting, and it was really new. And then I just think I hit a point where I was starting to also understand some of my struggles with OCD, and then some of that stuff was kind of coming into frame for me, you know, away from the studio and just in my personal life. But I started having, I still remember the first time that I had a panic attack on the air. I was doing a traffic report, so I was like doing the traffic, and I had to transition to do a live interview in the studio, and my heart was beating so far out of my chest that I couldn't get the words out. Like I legit was like gasping for air essentially on live television, and that had never happened to me in front of the camera before. Like in front of the camera was the place that, you know, I'd struggled with anxiety kind of in my personal life, but I could always step in front of the camera, and that was like kind of where I felt free, and I felt kind of invincible for a long time. You know, that was like the thing that I was good at, right? I was blessed with an ability to do that job, and I was really grateful for it, and it brought all these really cool opportunities my way. And then the anxiety seeped into my job, you know, and stepping into the studio became a terrifying experience every single day. I mean, every single day I was reading through the show before I would go on the air, and I was like mapping out. I knew kind of certain points where I'd be more susceptible to having a panic attack. You know, and I'd be like, that's kind of a spot where I think I might have one. And then I would step into the show being terrified that I was going to have one. And sometimes I could get through it, and I could manage the heart beating out of my chest feeling enough to kind of get the words out. And then other times I couldn't do it. And I would literally at times have to like look to my co-anchor and pretend like I had something in my throat, you know, and kind of cough my way through it and get through it that way. So it was awful.
They didn't know what was happening to you.
No.
I find it interesting that you figured out ways from 6th grade on, as you pursued your goals, to put anxiety in the backpack that you needed it to go in that day, and your panic attacks.
Yeah.
But by the time we get to when it started happening on the air, it becomes very clear. You can't run away from this.
No.
It's happening to you, and you have to face it. You can't find a camera or a job that's gonna squash it.
100%. And what I found really interesting about, so the panic attacks for me were never about, it was less about being scared that the person out there watching the news was like how they were gonna react to it. It was more like, how are my coworkers gonna react to it? Like I was anxious about putting them in a situation where they were uncomfortable, because here's me, who's been doing, you know, I've been in front of a camera for like 10 years. Like, I'm supposed to be able to do this job. This is what I'm paid to do. I'm supposed to be good at this. And I all of a sudden can't do the job. And so it was like it was a fear of making the people in the studio uncomfortable that I was struggling. And so there's a big piece of vulnerability to all this, right? Like, it was like a fear of being vulnerable or being, you know, letting people in on the struggle. And I think that there's perfectionism that's run through a lot of my story, right? Like this kind of this need to like overcompensate and be perfect and be on and be amazing all the time, and like just all this like pressure that I put on myself from the outside. And so what I think a lot of this journey of just opening up and telling my story and getting real about panic attacks, getting real about my struggles with OCD, relationships, like just all the things that I've been blessed to do over the last year, really, since I've opened up and shared my story, is giving myself permission to be human, right? And giving myself permission to not always have it pulled together, and recognize that life is tough and life is really messy at times, and that's just part of being a human. Like, I wasn't really giving myself space to be a human being.
Yeah. I could, from afar, and as your colleague for several years, I can see that now, because Brian and I have worked together for a long time, but literally through the course of an interview that we had about you,
Yeah.
I started to see this person that I hadn't seen before. And Brian and I hung out casually. We
Sure.
have mutual friends. We went out.
Yeah.
But he was always this kind of mystery. Like, he's a really nice guy. He's got it so together.
Yeah.
But that was all I knew.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that you were performing the role that you wanted to well, but it was really, none of us knew him. And we all were just kind of like, what's he about? Which brings me to what I think we need to talk about too, which is the OCD.
Yep.
The panic attacks are one thing, and as you struggle to be perfect and you struggle to fit into this role that you've decided that you need to have, probably when you were much younger, you start to notice something else that is making you really withdraw from those of us who don't know you, who are your friends.
Yeah. I was very loosely diagnosed and kind of started having things in the OCD world kind of brought to my attention when I started working with a therapist finally in college, around the time that I was coming out, and really working through some struggles with my sexuality, which is another piece of my story. She loosely kind of, I always for the longest time really identified with struggling with anxiety. Like that was, I struggle with anxiety, and that was just kind of what I identified with. And I'm a big believer that, we can get into this whole conversation about whether being diagnosed with something is helpful, if it's limiting, all of that. What I have found is that understanding my struggles with OCD has been a pivotal piece in my journey, because it's given context and it's given an understanding to some of the stuff that I was struggling with, and it's introduced me to a really beautiful community of people, right, that struggle with similar things. And so OCD is a very misunderstood disorder. Most people associate, when you hear OCD, you think of being organized, you think of washing your hands, you think of being tidy, right?
That's what we often even use it as a kind of a joke term.
It's like an adjective.
Right.
So OCD
So OCD. Or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what our society, I think, has come to understand OCD as. And the washing the hands, that is a very real struggle for a lot of people in the OCD community. There's also this kind of subset, or this way that OCD can manifest that isn't talked about enough, where it's a lot of so you experience anxiety, and then there's a lot of like mental compulsions, mental rituals, ruminating, going over things a million times in your mind, analyzing thoughts from every possible angle and trying to figure them out, and essentially just being caught in your head 24/7, going over and over and over about certain thoughts, and intrusive thoughts being at the core of a lot of people that struggle with OCD. So having a thought, I always like to describe it as, somebody that does not have OCD generally, we all as human beings have thoughts that run the gamut. They're all over the place. Some of them kind of weird, some of them kind of strange. But somebody that does not have OCD, you have a thought, you're kind of like, oh, that's kind of an interesting thought. Might kind of throw you off for a couple seconds, but then you kind of move on with your day, and it's like, oh, that just happened. Somebody that has OCD, and that where it manifests in this way, the thought comes in, and instead of just flowing through, that thought gets really stuck in your psyche and gets really stuck in your mind, and you're questioning, why did I have that thought? What does that thought say about me? Does this thought mean I'm a bad person? I need to get rid of the thought, and I mean, you become so consumed up in your mind that it's debilitating, and it's a really exhausting way to live. And so a lot of the thoughts that stick for people that struggle with OCD are kind of taboo in nature. So having violent thoughts, having sexual thoughts, having thoughts that you're going to harm somebody else, like all of these thoughts that quote unquote you're not supposed to have as a human being,
Right.
are what generally get really stuck. And what's really sad about it is that there's a lot of people out there walking around thinking that there's something inherently wrong with them because they're having these thoughts, when the reality is that you just have a very sticky brain. I like to kind of describe it as having a really sticky brain, thoughts just come in and they get stuck in a way that maybe other people don't experience. And you get stuck in this like repetitive trying to figure out and get to the bottom of the thought and trying to analyze it. And so you're trying to get certainty about something and get to the bottom of something that there just isn't an ability to get to the bottom of. And so the example that I always share, and my poor mother,
I was going to ask about this.
I know, because I always feel like when I bring this up, I need to give some sort of a tangible example of kind of the ways that it's manifested so that people can understand it. And trust me, I've had every intrusive thought on the map, sexual, violent, all the things that make me start questioning all these really scary things about myself. But the one that I felt comfortable when I decided to step in and do this is a thought that I had about my mom when I was in middle school. Like we had just moved to Fargo, and I was sitting in our kitchen at the time, and there was a knife on the counter. And I remember that this random thought popped into my head that was, what if I grabbed that knife and I stabbed my mom? Like I just remember that like thought, like my mind, it was essentially my mind getting really creative in the moment, right? And just like seeing two things and being like, oh, that'd be weird if I did that. And I remember that scared the crap out of me in sixth grade. You know, I mean, it was just like oh my gosh, like, do I want to do that? Why would I have that thought? What does this say about me? You know, and the thing about OCD is that, you learn really quickly that our brain, there's a very big difference between thinking something and doing something, right? Like those are two very different things. Mm-hmm. And so, my therapist always used to joke that he would trust people, that struggle with OCD to, babysit his kids, and he'd be more concerned about his patient, being at risk because of his kids being all over the place than he would worry about the safety of his children, essentially. So it's a really scary disorder to live with, and it's a really scary thing to experience. There's an immense amount of shame with it, and I have felt so passionately about really diving into these conversations because there's way too many people out there experiencing these kinds of things, and they're walking around feeling like there's something wrong with them. And yet, and there are beautiful, amazing tools to learn how to maneuver this stuff and really live a beautiful, fulfilling life.
Let's go there, Brian. Can you take us to the point where you knew, everybody has a tipping point, right? Mm-hmm. And so you made a decision at yours, and your life really, at least from the outside looking at it, has changed dramatically. In his work, sure, but the way that you continuously give yourself. So take me to the point where something happened where you decided everything had to change.
Yep. So it was during the state fair, actually, so it would have been 2 state fairs ago. I was in a really tough place. I mean, I remember there was a weekend where I was working at Care 11. I was doing radio for a local sports team at the time. I was doing a lot of different things, and I remember I went to a yoga class, and I came home and I was sitting on the couch, and I got to a point where I just was like, I cannot do this. I was so overwhelmed with life, and I just felt like kind of those depersonalization feelings really intensely. And I remember I called my mom, cried to her on the phone, which is not something that I do. I mean, it's a rare thing for me to really break down. And I remember just saying to my mom, I just want somebody to take care of me. I'm so sick of putting up the front, and just forging ahead. And it was in that weekend, something about that experience of just really breaking down and just being I can't do this anymore. I knew that I needed to make a change. And so what I decided at that time I was going to do was I felt like I needed a break from stepping into the kind of the firestorm of doing the news and getting in front of a camera, experiencing panic attacks, and talked to my boss and told her that kind of what was going on. And I was very, very, very extremely blessed that I had a boss that was super receptive and super supportive, moved into this producing role for our morning show, which has allowed me to do work that feels more authentic to myself as well. I think a piece in my story too is that for me personally, talking every day about murder and crime and all the things that come with the news got to be really tough for me too. So I think there was a piece both in needing a break from putting myself through all the panic attacks and also really honoring myself and saying I need to also move in the direction of work that feels a little bit more authentic to who I am.
Absolutely. I mean, again, it wasn't in my spiritual practice, like the role that you might be sent here to play was not that. Even though you were very good at the news and covering the divisive nature of politics and crime and all of the things, it wasn't real.
Absolutely. It and that's I always have felt that I wouldn't trade my experience as a news anchor for anything. It has brought me to where I am now, and it has allowed me, like Carol Evan has given me the platform to do this work. I mean, it's gotten me to a place where I can talk about the things that I really feel called to talk about and to let other people know that they're not alone and to really help people on that journey. And I think everything happens for, I think there's a beautiful, when you start kind of connecting the dots and you look back, it's like I had to go through all these things to get here.
You heard Rabbi Zimmerman. I mean, you have to be, embracing your brokenness is exactly what you do.
100%.
And use it for good and for teaching and for empathy and for connection between us.
Yeah.
Brian, you went through that in 2018. You and I held the conversation that we had kind of coming out with this story last year.
Yeah.
We had could never imagine living in the time we're in now, where I believe is pushing every button on anybody with any sort of tipping point, any depression, any anxiety, even if you don't have that. What can you say to people right now who are experiencing this and also struggling with mental health and living in a time right now that could take down any of us?
Yeah. I would say, first of all, that it's okay to be having a hard time. I think that's a really big piece in all of this, is that giving yourself permission to be having a hard time, if that's how you're feeling out there, is a huge step. Because I think we expect a lot of ourselves, and we expect ourselves to always get it all pulled together and be on and do all the things perfectly and all of that. And
well,
so
that's
I think
what we're taught, right? To champion, to
100%.
persevere. I mean, you see ads for Nike sneakers and gear and Gatorade, and it tells you, not just through sport, but through life, keep going.
I know.
Be the hero.
And I think there's a time and a place to push, and there's a time and a place to really persevere and kind of that more like masculine energy, right? Mm-hmm. And I also think that we're doing a great disservice to the world by putting too much of that messaging out there, because ultimately, we're all like human beings on this planet doing the best that we can day in and day out, and part of being a human is that there's really deep struggle, and that there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of shame, and there's a lot of all the things right alongside with the joy and the beautiful things that life can bring our way. And so I don't pretend for 2 seconds to have the answer about how to maneuver all of this. What I do think is that we are living in an incredible time of uncertainty. And talk about the title of this mental health conference, right? Inviting positivity in uncertain times. And what has been very interesting to see play out is that a lot of the work that I actually have done with my OCD therapist and have done with anxiety is learning to lean into uncertainty. So kind of going back to, the living with intrusive thoughts and your mind wanting to get 100% certainty about why I had the thought and what the thought says about me. The way to heal through that stuff is not to get 100% certainty. It's actually about noticing the thoughts, noticing the experience of anxiety, and saying, I'm going to kind of let myself off the hook, and I do not need to get 100% certainty about this right now. I'm going to actually lean into the uncertainty that I'm feeling, and I'm going to feel what that feels like in my body, and I'm going to move ahead, allowing myself to be uncertain. And so
How does that not give you a panic attack?
It does initially, right?
Okay.
And it takes an immense amount of practice. So really the therapy that you do for OCD is essentially living with uncertainty. I mean, I'll sit there with my therapist and be like, okay, I had this thought and I had this experience and I need you to tell me like what it says about me. And she'll be like, maybe it says something bad about you, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We're not gonna waste the time
It's
going
like dream
down.
interpretation, right? Like,
Yeah.
I had this dream. What does it say
What does
about
it
me?
say about me?
Could be any number of things, but doesn't matter.
I know. And initially, I know that sounds awful, and I know that like we're wired. We want certainty. Like that's what we're all seeking. I think a lot of the time as humans, and yet there's a really beautiful healing space that we can enter into when we kind of throw our hands up in the air a little bit, surrender, and just say, you know what, I'm not going to waste the time going down the rabbit hole in my mind and trying to figure this out. I'm gonna feel the uncertainty and all the anxiety that comes with that, and I'm gonna practice living in that space as I put one foot in front of the other and live my life how I want to be living my life. And because we waste so much time, you guys, trying to figure things out and achieve certainty, and it's like certainty is like an illusion. It's something that we never fully reach.
I think that's why we spend so much money on this pill's going to do this.
Absolutely.
This is going to do this. Retail object's going to do that. This book is going to save me. This relationship, right? And there, I was teasing Brian before. I'm like, during this conversation, we're going to have to tell people the magic thing that makes this life more manageable, and it being a joke in that there isn't one thing. I want to take you back to the phone call with your mom.
Yeah.
You were having that weekend near the state fair. I remember you were doing also play-by-play in a major sports arena. And I'm like, what is this? Why can this guy get more jobs? And you tip.
Perfection.
You had that person to speak to. Before you get to doctors, before you go to your boss, you tip and you talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Would that be something that, and that's a brave first step where you say something out loud. So talk about that conversation and how it could apply to other people, like maybe somebody they could go to or something like that.
So what I know about struggling with mental health, and for me personally, when things get really tough and I get into a space where I'm really having a hard time, my immediate response is to withdraw and to isolate. And that's just, I'm aware of that about myself. And so I have to constantly fight that, and I have to constantly be aware of that and recognize that when there's the struggle itself, right? There's the anxiety itself. And then when I start to isolate and I start to pull away from people and I start to become in this bubble where I'm just all alone, that's where things get really, really intense. And so I think that anybody out there struggling that can relate to that, in the moment where we feel like connection is the last thing that we want, more often than not, it's what we need the most. And so I like to always say to people that it takes one person. You don't have to go out there and you don't have to tell your story to the entire world. You don't have to call up every person that you know and tell them what you're going through and go through all the details. It's finding one safe person that you can, even if you just say to them, I'm having a really hard day today and things are really tough. I think that there is a profound experience in letting one other person on the planet know that I'm having a hard time, because it's fighting up against this pattern that I've been in for most of my life of feeling really intense things inside, not being okay inside, and then projecting to the world this image that I have it all pulled together and things are great. That leads to a place of extreme loneliness and not living a life authentically.
And I think that that's a story that, we want to make universal, because you all know it too. You don't have to be in television to be trying to be two different people. That whole imposter syndrome conversation, or wherever you're trying to be the best teacher, parent, bus driver, executive, healthcare worker, firefighter, police officer, convenience store clerk. Like, we can all be doing that same thing. It doesn't matter which job you have.
Yeah.
Brian, you talk about the withdrawal and isolation part, and when I talk to mental health professionals, that is what they are most concerned about right now in uncertain times, because
Yeah.
we are told to withdraw and isolate almost literally to keep each other safe. So I know that this is, again, a hard question to answer now because you're living through these times as well, but
Absolutely.
what can help us in these times while we have to withdraw and isolate, not do so that's harmful to our mental health?
Yeah. Is this where I give the big answer that fixes
Is
everything?
this, it might be.
I think this is
might
the
be
part
it.
where it happens. What I would invite is, I think, number one, bringing a real gentleness to your experience. And I know that that sounds really woo-woo, but I think what we need to do is we need to be very, like my automatic response is I just want to say, go connect with people. And I know that it's not that simple, that it's hard in and of itself sometimes, and yet we have all these other things happening in the world that make that more difficult right now. But I think we need to, this is an opportunity to really be gentle with ourselves. And whatever you are experiencing today, recognizing that there's nothing wrong with you, right? And that you're human today. And that, I think that's step number one. A mantra that I have, I don't know if this really will pertain to the whole connection thing, but I actually have this bracelet on my wrist that I wear. It's you can engrave words on it, and it's my words for this year have been allow and show up.
What's that mean?
And that has been a mantra that has been really pivotal for me. And so what has been a game changer for me is to, in any moment, right, like any moment, creating space for myself to feel whatever I am feeling in this moment. So anxiety, doubt, shame, uncertainty, loneliness, all the things. I'm gonna make space for that. Like and this takes practice, right? Like this isn't something you just say and it necessarily just happens, but I'm gonna make space for that. I'm gonna open up to that. I'm gonna not try to get all that stuff to go away necessarily in this moment, but I'm gonna invite it along for the ride. It doesn't mean I have to love it. Doesn't mean it has to be this thing that I'm like, oh, this, yay, shame's here, that's great. No, it's saying, okay, I see you. I'm gonna allow you to be part of my experience, and then I'm gonna, with all of that along for the ride, do my best to show up for my life. I'm gonna do my best to show up for that Zoom call with a friend. I'm gonna show up for that social distanced, gathering with family. I'm gonna do my best to have my actions be more in line with what I know is healthy for me. And that may be connection, and it's different for everybody, right? It might be, this can pertain to things like work, right? If you're feeling really overwhelmed at work, I'm gonna allow all of those things, maybe as you're stepping into like a big presentation at work, and you're shaking, literally shaking, and you're sweating, we're gonna allow that to be part of the process because we're human, and we're gonna get in front of that audience, virtually, and we're gonna do the thing. So, get it, kind of going back to what you said about there's not the one thing that's going to get it all to go away, right? I went down this journey for a long time. I tried it really hard. I was like, I'm going to yoga my way out of this. Yeah. I'm going to meditate until I don't have anxiety, and that just for me personally didn't lead me to a very healthy place.
Well, it adds to the shame, right? It's like,
100%.
Oh my gosh, I am doing the things, the yoga, the meditation, I'm drinking tea, I don't have caffeine, I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, why am I not better?
100%.
So you can that shame bucket's getting overflowing at that point.
Yeah, and so the second that I really started to look at my anxiety as not something to necessarily get to go away, but to make space for, and recognize that I'm resilient enough to experience those things when they arise, and I can move with it, and I can still live my life the way that I want to. Game changer. It's been extremely messy along the way. And I think that's a big piece in all of it, is really giving ourselves permission to feel messy and to feel uncomfortable as we're doing life. But I think if I could offer up, that would be a really big thing that I would want to offer up today, is that let's lean in the direction, let's kind of move away from trying to get anxiety to stop, getting negative emotions to stop, and try to kind of allow space for them, because the more that we fight them, the more that we fight the anxiety, it's going to push back that much stronger at us. And it's been a total game changer for me.
As I listen to you talk about these things and as I read things that you write, it always strikes me how much a particular audience may need to hear this. Many subsets of the audience,
Yeah.
but this is harder for men.
Absolutely.
When you talk about letting things in and giving things
I know.
space, that is not typically a first language that men are taught to be in a hyper-masculine society, right?
For sure.
You know, for women, I can talk about this with my friends, and we talk about this all the time.
Yep.
But talk about it, like, the struggle for men to get to that spot, if you had it or what you've observed talking to other people.
Absolutely. It's absolutely a hurdle in the mental health space. I think that there's we're talking about all those messages that we get, just do it, just go for it, all those things. I think it's that much stronger for men. And my hope is that by me speaking out, I can just plant the seed in one, guy, girl, whoever, but, especially right in men, that if you're struggling and it's feeling hard and you don't know how to open up, I think you just need to hear that there's nothing wrong with you. We've unfortunately placed all these rules on what it means to be a guy in our society, and a lot of it's BS. It's just it's setting men up to struggle with this stuff really intensely internally and not have any outlet to release it.
Yeah, those messages hurt men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really been remarkable in the last year or two to see men in positions like yourself that have a bigger platform talk about this stuff. We've seen players in the NFL and the NBA. We've seen actors and musicians talk about mental health in a bigger and more meaningful way, and just saying the words out loud. I think it's really impressive.
Which I'm so excited about, because I think about myself. I was even thinking about the 6th grade version of myself stepping into this today. I had no idea what I was experiencing in that lunchroom in 6th grade. I had no idea. I'd never even really heard the word anxiety. I thought there was something just deeply wrong with me, and that's why I was struggling. And that breaks my heart to think of any kids out there, right, that are maybe in that similar space. But my hope is that through more conversations, more people speaking out, we can reach kids in that moment when they first start having those experiences of anxiety. And we can, I literally look at it as we need to move them in the direction of, oh, okay, that's that anxiety thing I think I've heard about. I think there's, so-and-so talked about that. There's some resources out there. Here's some tools. I can maybe go talk to a therapist. Let's move them in that direction, as opposed to anxiety comes up for the first time and then, I need to shove that down. I need to not talk about that. I need to keep it in this dark corner, and it just physically builds up in our body in this really unhealthy way. And so I think every person that speaks out, I think is moving us more in that direction of openness and, okay, there's that thing that I've heard about. And I think, sometimes when you're doing this work, you start to feel why am I doing this? Why am I revisiting these things over and over again? But I really do go back over and over again to that 6th grade version of myself and how badly I, in that moment, needed to hear, some of this stuff.
And let's talk too about, this, you use the term work or the word work. Again, in American culture in 2020, anxiety, right? We all have it. Well, call up the family doc and get the pill to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then that's the work. You made the call, you put the pill in your mouth, you swallow it. Obviously, I'm not saying medication is bad, but there has to be another component to it, would you say? Or
So I always talk about this idea of having a mental health toolkit. So I am constantly in my life finding things, right? Finding tools that I can add to that toolkit. I think that I do not subscribe to this idea that there's this one magical fix-all solution that's going to just take all my anxiety away and then take it away, and then I can just live happily ever after. It's a culmination for me personally. I can only talk about my own experience. It's a culmination of a lot of things that I draw upon day in and day out that don't eliminate anxiety and don't eliminate struggling with OCD and all of that, but it puts me in a place where I can show up for my life. It makes it manageable, right? It makes it so that I'm not so overwhelmed by it where I can't function. So my toolkit looks like, I've worked with therapists, going to a therapist. Medication is a piece of my toolkit. I like to always bring that up because I know that there can be a lot of shame about medication. I went through that myself. What if I start a medication and it changes who I am and it makes me not be able to live my life, to the full potential? I've found medication for me extremely helpful. Movement, right? Getting good sleep, connection is huge. Yoga, doing this work is a piece of my toolkit, being vulnerable and really opening up. And so all of these things like work together in a way that I can live with it. And some days are really hard, some days are better. And that's where I just try to wherever I'm at day in and day out, I try to just invite it along for the ride. But I think, getting, sometimes you can even just write it down. These are the things that I know help me when I'm in a really tough space. And I think the toolkit approach has really, really served me.
You use the word management as well. Things that you will manage to have a productive day or a productive life. And the word that came into my mind was happy. I know a lot of people on this journey, and at times when I've been on my mental health journey, we're all on a mental health journey, I believe.
100%.
You ask the question of yourself, okay, I'm managing, but will I ever be happy? What does that mean to you?
I always look at happiness. Feels like a very fleeting emotion to me. It feels like a very, I think in my life, I'm a little bit less focused on it. Can I be happy? And more focused on what do I have to do to truly stay in my body, right? And to feel contentment and to feel groundedness in who I am. Recognizing that some days I'm gonna feel messy and I'm gonna feel sad and I'm gonna feel down. And other days I'm gonna feel a lot of joy and I'm gonna feel happy and I'm gonna feel inspired. And whatever makes up me that day is who I am. And I think the journey is less about trying to get to a place of happiness and trying to actually get to a place where we can hold space for all of it. And I think that there's a lot of life that happens, right, to get you to that place. But I think the less that we can be fixated on trying to get to a happy place, because I think a lot of times what happens is we live and we live and we live and we think that we're going to just arrive at happy and then we can start living our life. And I think we miss out on way too much life by subscribing to that approach. And
It's
so
very Beatles right now. Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
It's so true. I mean, it's true. And I literally realize I'm like a walking cliche half the time when I'm talking. I'm not naive to that point, but I truly believe it. I think the more that you really step into this path of healing and, whether you want to call it spiritual work or personal growth or whatever, is you just recognize that as humans, we experience things that are just all over the board every single day. And the less that we fight it, the more grounded, the more content, the more present we can be to just the present moment. Because this is all we ever have, guys. All we ever have is the now.
What is that first step for somebody at home today? And you talked about talking to another person, but for me, that's step 7.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about making space for something. What do you mean, Brian? How do I make space for a negative feeling or for me to face something? What's that mean?
Practice. I think that there's again, it's not something that you just say and then it happens. I think there are some really beautiful analogies and metaphors out there that have been really helpful for me. I love this analogy of a bus. Bear with me on this. hang tight with me. I promise this will
hanging.
make sense. So there's an approach to therapy out there called acceptance and commitment therapy that has been really, really helpful for me. And I can answer more questions on that later, and there's beautiful resources out there. But one of the metaphors that they use with that is this idea of a bus. And I'm the driver of the bus, right? Like, so I'm actually sitting in the driver's seat, hanging onto the wheel. And as I'm driving along and as I'm moving, I'm going to allow passengers to get on board that represent things like shame, sadness, anxiety, doubt, uncertain. I'm going to invite them to get on the bus, but they're going to actually sit in the back of the bus, and I'm going to, and I'm deciding where we're going, right? So like I am in the driver's seat of where we're going, day in and day out. So like when I wake up in the morning, I'm driving the bus, right? And I'm going to, even if it sounds silly, but maybe you're just literally imagining that anxiety that you're feeling as like, okay, it gets to hop on board. I'm not really super jazzed that it's here, but it's going to sit in the back and it's going to try to like jump into the driver's seat and tell us where we need to go. But I think when we recognize that we are separate than that anxiety, like anxiety is not who you are. It's this thing that you're experiencing, and it can sit in the back of the bus and move along. That's honestly a metaphor that I draw upon really often. I think that having a mindful practice, having some sort of a practice to get you from this space into more of your heart space is a really beautiful way to practice these things. Meditation, yoga. I've been doing a lot of breath work recently. That's something that I know is evolving out there and has been a really beautiful tool for me. But utilizing all the toolkit that I talked about, and then doing those practices that get me more into my body as opposed to living up into my head.
And I would, for those that, meditation and yoga, if that's not for you,
100%.
Meditation and stretching, and meditation can be different. Like my meditation might be taking my basketball and shooting 20 free throws by myself and then like breathing in and out when I do it. Because I'll be honest, I'm not that good at yoga.
Yeah.
And not in a competitive way. It just doesn't relax.
Doesn't
me
work
in the
for you.
same way.
Yeah.
It actually puts me in my head. So it can. All I'm saying is it could be cooking. It could be baking. Is actually very meditative.
Yeah.
Walking, running, whatever it is, that can put you in that space, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's important to know that what works for the person next to you, might not work for you. And that's where we have to really get into that space of just recognizing, truly what works for me, what feels good for me, what truly
like
grounds me.
the state fair may work for you. It may not work for me.
Absolutely.
As just a fun place.
It's just, it's a lot going on at the state fair. Although we wish we had that this year. Not having it.
I think I've one more opportunity for you to get a kind of a final thought before you move on and take some folks' questions, like your goal here and what you want people to take away.
Yeah, I think what I want people to know is that you are way more resilient than you realize. That is something that people who struggle with their mental health do not give themselves enough credit for. Like truly what has gotten you to this point, right? Whether, like whatever it is, like everything that you have been through up until this point that has brought you to this moment took an immense amount of resilience. Like incredible amount of resilience. Think of all the things that you've struggled with and you've made it and you've arrived. And so I think when things get really hard, we all seem to have this kind of deeper well of strength that we just don't realize is there until we truly need it. And so I would want to offer that up. I would want you to know just truly that there's nothing wrong with you. Like you are whole just the way you are. You have everything that you need right there within you. And don't for 2 seconds let that mind of yours start to take you down that road of, that there's something bad or that there's something wrong going on here. You are human, doing the best that you can in this moment to show up, and let's invite it all along for the ride, right? Whatever that means to you.
Get everybody on the bus.
Get on that bus.
And drive your
maybe
own.
Maybe I'll physically start driving around the Twin Cities and just
That'd be great.
invite people on the bus once COVID is over.
That would be really interesting therapy.
That'd be it. Might get a little weird. But
Life's weird.
yeah. Embrace the weird.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, anytime.
And we, I know we're gonna have a little bit of a break here, And then we are gonna, I'll be back here, I believe in about 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes, and I'm gonna be answering questions for about 45 minutes to an hour. So I would invite you to come back if you have any questions, if anything I said made sense, if it didn't make sense, I'm happy to clarify on anything. And so glad that you are here, and we'll talk to you soon.